Hello and welcome to lesson 13. This is our second lesson on the muscular system. Our last lesson we talked really about the microscopic structure of a muscle and how muscle contraction works. In this lesson we're going to really talk about the different muscles of the body and what they do. So first we're going to talk about different types of body movements, and you're really going to be interested in this if you want to go into physical therapy or athletic training. This is right up your alley. So first let's talk about the origin and insertion of a muscle. So the origin is the part of the muscle that's going to be attached to the immovable or less movable bone, and then the insertion is going to be the part of the muscle that is attached to the movable bone. So when the muscle contracts and shortens, the insertion is going to move towards the origin. And if we look here, we're going to look at the bicep right now, and really what we're going to look at is the insertion and the origin. So the insertion of the tricep and the bicep is going to be down here, okay, right here where it says insertion. So this is going to be the more movable bone, okay? When you do a bicep curl, the radius and ulna goes up towards the humerus. So that's going to be your insertion because these bones here are going to be moving. The origins are going to be up in this area. And really, it's because that isn't going to move. So the bicep and the tricep origin is going to be on parts of the humerus and the scapula, and that is the less movable bone compared to your forearms. All right, so now we're going to get into the actual movements. So a lot of times these are going to be opposites of each other. So for example, flexion and extension are opposite. So flexion is when you decrease the angle of a joint and bring the bones closer together, and then the extension is the opposite. So if you're going to bend your knee, that's going to be flexion. When you extend your knee back out, that's going to be extension. And then the picture over here would show more of like a bicep curl. So as she comes up on her bicep curl, it's going to be flexion, and then when she extends her elbow, it's going to be extension. All right, rotation. This is movement of the bone around the axis, and the best one I think really is this atlas and axis joint up here. The rotation of the neck is extremely easy to kind of comprehend. Okay, the next two ones we're going to talk about is abduction and adduction. And once again, these are going to be opposites of each other. So anytime we are abducting, we are moving the limb away from the midline. So we're talking about the frontal plane. Remember, frontal plane is side-to-side motions. And this is when we're going to move the limb away from that midline. So if you look here, okay, at this one, let's just draw the midline for you. If it's abduction, we're going to be moving it out, away from the midline. And then adduction is the opposite. And how I always used to remember it when I was first learning is I want to add to the center of the body. I'm adding to the midline of the body. Okay, so adduction is going towards the midline of the body. Abduction is moving away from the midline of the body. All right, circumduction. Circumduction is when you're able to make circles and basically move the hip kind of in a circle, or even take your arm and kind of move it all the way around your head. So it's really common in ball and socket joints because they have a lot of movement. Basically, one part of the joint is going to kind of stay in the same place, but then the distal end, the one further away from the origin of the body, is going to be able to move in a circle. All right, dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Once again, these are going to be opposites of each other. So if you are going to do a calf raise and go up on your toe, that is going to be plantar flexion. And then if you stand on the ground and lift your toes up from your heel, that's going to be dorsiflexion. So standing on your toes would be plantar flexion, doing like a calf raise. Standing on your heels would be dorsiflexion. Inversion and eversion. If you've ever sprained your ankle before, you've probably had an inversion ankle sprain. They're very common. So this is if you were sitting and then your toe, your little toe goes towards the ground. So you're kind of twisting your ankle in that direction. So the sole of your foot is going to be facing medially. And then eversion would be the total opposite. So your big toe would be going towards the ground and the sole of the foot would be turned out laterally. So if you ever get kind of confused about those, just remember that inversion is how a lot of ankle sprains occur. So once you kind of just do that natural motion of spraining your ankle, that one we all hate, you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's inversion. All right, supination and pronation. This is really talking about the radius and the ulna. So supination is when you are facing the palm anteriorly. So this is when you're in the anatomical position. I always remembered it as if you were to hold a cup of soup or a bowl of soup out in front of you. That is supination. And then pronation is when you turn your arm around and the palms are going to face posteriorly. So if you're in the anatomical position and the palms are facing forward, that's supination. And then when you turn them so that they're facing backwards, that's going to be pronation. So that was all our body movements. Next, we're going to talk about how we name skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscles a lot of times have different criteria for being named, and you're going to see a lot of names that you're kind of already familiar with, and it's going to make a lot of sense. We're going to talk about 7 different criteria. So the first one is the direction of the muscle fibers. So if you look here, this muscle is one of your quadriceps, and it's called the rectus femoris. And the reason it's called rectus is because the fibers, muscle fibers, are running straight up and down. Okay, we also have the rectus abdominis, part of your abdominals. Same thing, the fibers are running up and down. Another one example would be oblique. So this means that the muscle fibers are running at a slant. So if you look, you have an external and internal oblique on your abdominals, and you can see how the fibers are running at a slant there. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the size of the muscle. Anytime you see the word maximus, it's going to be the largest. Anytime you see the word minimus, it's going to mean smallest. So for example, you have a gluteus maximus muscle. That is your largest gluteal muscle. You also will see some words with longus on the end of them, or some muscles with longus on the end of them. That means that the muscle a lot of times is kind of long and skinny. The location of the muscle. Sometimes they're named for the bones that they are on top of. For example, the frontalis muscle here is the muscle that covers the frontal bone of the skull. That's very nice, right? Whoever named that one. So frontalis muscle, front of the skull. The number of organs and the number of insertions is also a big one. So for example, biceps, bi equals 2. BI equals 2. So your biceps are going to have 2 organs. And then on the back of your arm, your triceps are going to have 3 organs. The location of the muscle's origin and insertion. This is one of my favorite muscle names to say, the sternocleidomastoid. And it's that muscle, it's often called the prayer muscle. It's right here. Okay, this is your sternocleidomastoid. Sometimes you can really see it on people on their neck. It goes at that angle. The origin is going to be at the sternum and the clavicle, so that's where we get the sternocleidoid from. And then the insertion is going to be on the mastoid process of the temporal bone of the skull. So there you go, sternocleidomastoid. Then we have the shape of the muscle. So for example, the deltoid, which is found kind of in the upper shoulder area right here, is in the shape of a triangle, which deltoid literally means triangular. And then the action of the muscle, so what it actually does, okay? So some of the muscles of your legs, for example, have the word flexor in front of them. That usually means that they're going to flex whatever joint that they're working with. So we're going to go ahead and stop there for right now. So just make sure that you know all of the different movements and all of the different ways that we name skeletal muscle. We're going to come back for video 2, and then we're going to go through all the different muscles of the body.